My name is Roger Cole. I'm the chair of the Neutrality Alliance. We were founded in '96 to campaign against the decision on what we thought then of the government and the corporate media's decision to seek to destroy neutrality, and that's pretty obvious at this stage. The procedure is that I'll be speaking for 10 minutes, and then the others will speak as I introduce them, and we'll be finishing off with Clare Daly. I just have a number of quick announcements. There's the Communist Party of Ireland is holding the Connolly commemoration on Sunday, May 15th at Arbor Hill at 3 o'clock. Secondly, when all the speakers finish, there will be a collection to help a cause. Right? So I'm going to start with a speech. I hope somebody, Ed, you can tell me to shut up when I get to 8 minutes, or give me a warning, and then I'll stop at 10 minutes.
I'll give you a poke.
That's fantastic, right? Now, there you are now. Speech has disappeared. No, it hasn't. Now, at the outbreak of the 1914-18 anti-imperialist war, July 28, the Irish Transport and General Workers' Union put up the banner that all of you know, neither King nor Kaiser but Ireland, outside Liberty Hall. On the 9th of September 1914, a meeting was held in the library of the Gaelic League. The people attending were James Connolly, William O'Brien, Thomas J. Clark, Eamon McCann, Arthur Griffith, John McBride, Sean McDermott, Thomas McDonagh, Patrick Pearce, Joseph Plunkett. Essentially, you're talking about the members of the Provisional Government of 1916. And the decision they made was to establish an Irish Neutrality League. In doing so, what they were continuing a long tradition, first established because the first person to advocate Irish neutrality was Theobald Wolfe Tone in a pamphlet that he wrote in 1790. And it wasn't a pamphlet that was forgotten, because in 2015, Cumann na Mban reproduced that leaflet. So you're talking about a tradition of people seeking Irish independence and Irish neutrality going back a very long way. In the 24th of September, John Redmond, the leader of the Home Rule Party, sought to recruit people into the British Army to fight in the inter-imperialist war. And there was a response, and the Irish Neutrality League called another major meeting to oppose that. So, right from the very beginning, there was a clear division between those Irish people that supported Irish independence and Irish neutrality and those people who supported imperialism. And that division never went away. The division really began before the Ukraine war, when the Sunday Times published a vicious and sustained editorial attack on Irish neutrality. And those values have been taken up by the entire corporate media. However, most of you know that public opinion polls showed that those visions and those images and those desires of the corporate leader, of the corporate elite, didn't reflect their values of the people over to which they seek to sell those newspapers. The headline on the Irish Times, April the 15th, 2022, quote, "Overwhelming support for the retention of military neutrality." It showed that 66% of people supported neutrality and 24% didn't. But 24% that did not want to do that, 63% wanted to join the nuclear-armed military alliance NATO, and the 78% wanted to join a common European defence. But of course, since France would obviously be part of that, its armed with nuclear weapons, it too would be a nuclear-armed military structure. Also, if you look at the figures of breakdown, for example, of the actual voters for various parties, Labour was 71%, Sinn Féin 67%, Fianna Fáil 66%, Fine Gael 61%, and the Green Party 59%. So you're talking about the actual people who vote for these parties that want to destroy neutrality don't actually support the idea that neutrality should be divided. So this issue of neutrality is not a left-right divide. It couldn't be. I mean, I just don't believe there are that many left-wing people in this country yet. Maybe sometime in the future, but not at the moment. So you are talking about this being a national sense of identity. In fact, Damon Lusher, who was the managing director of the company that carried out the poll, said, quote, "Neutrality is a core element of our national identity." And as far as I know, he has not a mad trot, right? He runs a business. This is what the figure shows, and that's what he said they meant. Being neutral is something that is part of the inherent nature of people identifying themselves as being Irish. So essentially what was happening is all these people who were hanging around in 1914 who supported imperialism, the Home Rulers and Southern Unionists, they've been waiting in the long grass for their time to come again. They're absolutely gagging to reintroduce imperialism and again make this country part of an imperial state. Whether it's I don't think that many want to go back to the British Union, but a lot of them have this idea that the European Union will be a good crowd to go and have a nuclear weapon. There are two mid-sized extremist parties, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and they're the ones that are pushing this. They've said it. I mean, the Minister for Foreign Affairs has made a position very clear. He wants to abolish the decision of the triple lock. You know, during these various referendums that many of us were involved in, they had to give concessions, and the concessions they gave were on the issue of neutrality. One was the Irish Army couldn't be sent abroad unless the state and the Security Council of the United Nations agreed if they were serving with the UN, and he wants to get rid of that. He said so explicitly. And the other one, that we can't actually join a European army with nuclear weapons until such time as there is a referendum. These were significant and considerable achievements. So don't be too quick about wanting to change the whole new constitution, because they're two very good parts of it. Now, I'll finish off by having a few brief remarks about the Ukraine war. Because at the outset of that war, Parliament made it very clear that we were opposing the illegal invasion of Russia of the Ukraine, in exactly the same way that we opposed the decision of the United Kingdom, the US, Australia and Poland to invade Iraq. The difference being that in the case of Iraq, when those four states said we're invading because Iraq has weapons of mass destruction, it was a lie. This time it isn't. This time both Russia and NATO are armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons. And as this war escalates, I'm absolutely convinced that that's exactly what can happen. It's not a pipe dream. Wars are uncontrollable. They expand. And these nuclear weapons will be used. Maybe they'll start using the small ones first, but they'll eventually get big, right? If there was ever a time in favour of Irish neutrality and not getting involved in this, and using our position as a small neutral state to seek a possibility of seeking a ceasefire and inclusive negotiations that would provide security for all the different states involved, including Russia. That's the only realistic option that we have, and that's not what we are doing as a small neutral country. That's not what you're hearing from the Times, the Sunday Times, the Independent, or any of it. I think virtually every single commentator, not everyone, but virtually every commentator on RTE, it's just war, 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 war. Virtually no analysis. I'm sure if you were reading the Irish Times or the Independent at the time in 1914, it would be the same stuff. They're driving us down a war which would mean it isn't just the Ukrainians who would be dead. We'll all be dead. There's a number of people who are speaking. I think Ed has to catch the train, so I'll ask Ed to speak first.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Okay, so if I speak sitting down.
Yeah.
Just over a century ago, the Irish people fought for and gained a very limited degree of independence just for 26 of our 32 counties. We got rid of one empire, but allowed religion in both North and South of Ireland to do huge damage to our democracy and human rights. I'm not anti-religion, but I am anti the abuse of religion. The elite of the British Empire largely remained in place thereafter and used immigration to get rid of those who might have opposed them. In the northern 6 counties, winds of change were blowing in the recent elections. But in our southern 26 counties, our successive governments have adopted a new, more dangerous empire in the USA, which is waging violent global wars for resources and using the people of Ireland, the vulnerable people of the Middle East, and now the people of Ukraine to wage these proxy wars. Nothing justifies the Russian war of aggression, but how quickly our mainstream media propaganda has airbrushed out of history the recent history of US and NATO war crimes and torture in the Middle East. It's as if the disastrous wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen and elsewhere had never happened. The valuable resources of these countries have been and are still being stolen, and now the resources of Russia and elsewhere are being targeted. At Shannon Airport, the Irish government, and by default we the Irish people, have been and are still being actively complicit in US wars of aggression, war crimes and torture. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael ministers and parties have abandoned Irish neutrality by allowing US military to use Shannon Airport, and they had active support of Labour and Green parties also when they were in government. It's great to see how many parties in opposition are opposed to ending Irish neutrality, but the minute they get promises of state cars and whatever, they abandon their principles. The recent Ipsos poll in the Irish Times, as Roger mentioned, clearly shows that the vast majority of the Irish people fully support Irish neutrality and reject Ireland joining NATO or the European Army. Yet our ministers, Gardaí and other officials have been guilty of facilitating war crimes, yet those who facilitate the war crimes go free over the past 20 years with no accountability, while over 38 peace activists have been prosecuted for trying to expose and prevent Irish complicity in war crimes. The latest prosecution ended last week when 2 very courageous US Veterans for Peace, Tara Kauf and Ken Myers, were found guilty of criminal damage. They were found not guilty, in fact, of criminal damage and trespass at Shannon Airport, but were outrageously found guilty of interfering with Shannon Airport and fined a total of €10,000, no less. It was a very perverse and unjust conviction designed to silence the whistleblowers and peace activists. We would have recommended appealing this unjust decision, but it would have imposed far too much hardship on Ken and Tarek, because they had already been forced to spend over 8 months here in Ireland when their passports were taken, and they also spent a total of 13 days in prison even before their trials. I want to express the thanks for all those who supported them and who enabled them eventually to go back to the US. But it does show the extent to which the innocent are being convicted and the guilty go free. A few words on the recent election in Northern Ireland and the very likely development into the future in Northern Ireland, which means a united Ireland is now increasingly likely. It will be absolutely vital that this united Ireland will be a neutral and a genuine independent united Ireland, and not just the 51st state of the United States kleptomaniac empire, or the 28th province of an equally kleptomaniac United States of Europe. Neutrality is nothing to be ashamed of. Our positive Irish neutrality has helped to create international peace, but did so at the expense of the deaths of 88 brave Irish soldiers who died on UN peacekeeping missions. Their sacrifices will have been in vain if we abandon neutrality and join the warmongers. I personally knew quite a few of those who have died on UN service, and some of them were good friends of mine. I served for 22 years in the Irish Defence Forces. It's not enough to talk peace, we also need to walk the walk of peace. Over a century ago, John Redmond and the Redmondites persuaded over 250,000 Irish soldiers to fight for the British Empire, allegedly to free small nations like Belgium, at the same time when Belgium was committing war crimes of a huge scale in the Congo. 50,000 young Irishmen died, some of them maybe not so young, in that war, totally unjustified. We are now possibly in the early stages of World War III, and our modern day Redmondites are all recommending, I think, that we join NATO, join the European Union Army. If we get involved in World War III, the 50,000 who died in World War I will look like a small number. The real risk of nuclear war exists. We have been, in the last couple of months especially, insulting Russia, making enemies of the Russian people. Very clearly, Vladimir Putin has made a dreadful mistake. He has done terrible damage to Russia and to the Russian people. There is no reason why Ireland should ever be enemies of Russia or Russia enemies of Ireland. A key issue is whether to continue in the short term to look for a constitutional amendment on neutrality. The likelihood is that if Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are still in power, the wording of any such referendum on neutrality will quite likely be decided by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and any such wording will effectively end Irish neutrality while claiming to enshrine neutrality in the Irish Constitution. With the exception of genuine defence, it's hugely important that Ireland remain a neutral country. We can achieve nothing as a military power, as we demonstrated in the First World War. We successfully stayed out of the Second World War, and we need to stay out of the Third World War. We should be promoting peace at the moment, not war. In the last couple of days, the UN Secretary General has said that the war in Ukraine would not go on forever. I wish he was correct. The UN has been neutered by the US and NATO and are now engaged in forever wars of aggression for world resources. The Russian war of aggression in Ukraine was not justified and is doing untold damage to Ukraine, but also to Russia and worldwide. NATO expansion to Russia's borders was the root cause of this unjustified war, but Putin stupidly and recklessly walked the US and NATO into a trap. Sometimes intelligent people do stupid and reckless things. Peace and neutrality, as opposed to the stupidity of trying to make peace by making war, was never more important in Europe, Eurasia and the wider world. So please support Irish neutrality, not for the value of neutrality itself, but for what we can achieve as a small country in making peace for the world. We have a huge international global diaspora. Their interests will never be served by Ireland participating in war or failing to do our duty to make peace. So there is much to be done. We are living in a hugely difficult, depressing time where everybody is preaching war. Huge propaganda where war is peace, lies is truth. And part of that propaganda at the moment is targeting Clare Daly, Mick Wallace and others who dare to speak truth to power. We need to know we are being manipulated, and we need to stand our ground and do what's best for Ireland and for the wider world. Thank you very much.
The next speaker is Jimmy Cochran. He's a member of the National Executive of the Communist Party of Ireland. He's the chair of the Cork branch, and he writes regularly in the Socialist Voice, the Communist Party paper, on issues of peace and neutrality.
Yeah, if you mind if I sit down as well, because I must go and catch a bus, not as good as the train. Where we stand today, the Irish state is neutral, and according to all opinion polls, when questioned, the majority of the population express support for neutrality, and they see it as something positive. In fact, even the government used the state's neutrality in its campaign for a seat on the UN Security Council. It's also true that there is pressure from both internal and external forces to end Irish neutrality, which has been chipped away piece by piece ever since Ireland joined the then EEC. The Communist Party of Ireland is opposed to this erosion of neutrality, and we believe it should be strengthened to bring it into line with norms of international law, which would, among other things, oblige the Irish government to take steps to prevent the state from becoming a base for military operations by a belligerent in a conflict. This would put an end to the use of Shannon Airport by the US military in its constant wars of aggression. It's important for us to look at the forces in favour and those opposed to Irish neutrality. Ever since the Irish working class emerged as an independent political force under the leadership of Connolly, it has proclaimed its support for neutrality, For example, when in Liberty Hall they unfurled the banner proclaiming, "We serve neither King nor Kaiser but Ireland." War is not in the interest of the Irish working class, neutrality is. In simple material terms, the cost of joining NATO and buying US and European armaments will divert resources from, among other things, health, housing and education. Also, it is not the sons and daughters of the wealthy who will have to go off and kill and die when NATO goes to war. No, as in all wars, it is the working class who will provide the bulk of the soldiers and the majority of the victims. The struggle of the Irish working class is against our ruling class, not against the working class of other countries. The external threat to Irish neutrality comes from the triple lock of imperialism, that is the UK, the USA and the EU, which the Communist Party has long identified as the main obstacle to Irish sovereignty and socialism. The Irish ruling class do not have to be coerced into abandoning neutrality. They are more than willing to do so. They have accepted a subservient position vis-à-vis imperialism as the means of maintaining their dominant position in the state. Their material interests are served by supporting imperialism and maintain the existing world order based on the hegemony of US imperialism. Foreign capital helps to provide employment and tax revenue, which in turn helps to stabilise the political situation for the indigenous capitalist class and allows them to maintain their control over the Irish state. Even if we could force the Irish ruling class to fully support neutrality, their ability to do so is limited as long as Ireland is held in the grip of this triple lock. Their class position is such they will never confront imperialism and will never push for full sovereignty. This is manifested in their wholehearted support for Atlanticism, which is premised on the assertion that peace, prosperity and progress is based on the political, economic and military alliance between the US, the UK and the EU and is expressed through membership of NATO. This is the unquestioned ideology of the Irish state and is constantly re-emphasised in the Irish media, with the Irish Times and the Business Post to the fore in pushing the view that the security and prosperity of the state is dependent on Atlanticism. There is no room for a contrary view, and those who challenge the dominant position are denounced as either fools or knaves, as Clare Daly can doubtlessly verify. The Defence Forces Review, which reflects the thinking of the upper echelons of Defence Forces and Department of Defence, also argues strongly in favour of Atlanticism. The Irish ruling class and its mouthpieces in the media identify with the worldview of imperialism and talk in terms of our strategic interests, when in fact they are referring to the interests of the US, British and European capitalist class. They argue that Ireland has a so-called free ride in the back of NATO countries who, they claim, provide us with protection. We are informed that we have a moral duty to join NATO and probably an EU army as well, and increase military spending to pay for that protection. A bit like a crime gang protection racket. And once we join, Irish troops can then be sent anywhere in the world that NATO or the US determines that their interests are under threat. However, NATO is not and never was a defensive organisation. It's an aggressive military alliance as befits its role as an instrument of US foreign policy. It is the means by which the US imperialism exerts its control over Europe and it seeks to replicate that role on a worldwide basis. It is also a nuclear alliance. Full membership of NATO would mean that 100 years after we were told that 26 counties had left the empire, Irish troops would be used to suppress any state which tried to break with imperialism. For what died the sons of Roisin, for what indeed? NATO membership is not in line with the Irish anti-colonial tradition, nor is it in line with the needs of the Irish people. Over the past number of years, the clamour to abandon neutrality and join NATO has increased. So why the increased pressure to end neutrality? This increased push has coincided with the perceived threat to the unipolar world dominated by US imperialism. The Chinese economy has grown in size and in sophistication, and an increasing number of countries have signed up to its Belt and Road Initiative. The Irish ruling class see the growth of China as a threat to the US dictated economic and political order on which they depend. If imperialism is weakened, they are weakened. Week after week, newspaper articles inform us of the threat posed to Ireland by the rise of China and regional powers such as Russia. The Irish ruling class identified so much with the interests of imperialism that the media carry alarms pieces about the threat to our way of life whenever any country, which is seen as strategically important by imperialism, seeks an independent economic and political path. China was only perceived as a threat to Ireland when US imperialism declared it as a threat to its position of world domination. Now we are told we have to join NATO to protect us from China. Now, even if we only deal with the 26 counties, over the last 50 years, the only threats to Ireland have come from imperialism. The Dublin Monaghan bombings were planned by British military intelligence, and it's not that long ago since the Tory Minister Priti Patel threatened Ireland with starvation during Brexit negotiations. And let's not forget the EU Commission was forced the Irish state to accept liability for 40% of European banking debt. These were real threats, but they don't count, it seems. Much of the pro-imperialist commentary in the Irish media claims that neutrality involves covering our eyes and ears and ignoring reality. We are told to grow up as a society and accept our responsibilities. However, joining in an aggressive military alliance whose raison d'etre is to further the interests of imperialism is not a recipe for peace. Ireland should adopt a position of neutrality which is in line with international law. It should campaign for an end to all military pacts and to build an alliance of other countries to oppose military aggression. All foreign troops should be withdrawn from Europe, and comprehensive arrangements taking into account the security interests of all European states should be negotiated. Such a policy is a better guarantee of security than joining NATO. However, the Irish ruling class has no interest in such a policy, as was demonstrated recently when Simon Coveney, the foreign minister of an ostensibly neutral country, instead of calling for a ceasefire and peace negotiation between Russia and Ukraine, lined up behind NATO and pushed for increased military and economic actions against Russia, potentially prolonging the war and the suffering and increasing the possibility that the conflict would spread. The issue of neutrality is one of self-determination and democracy. Only a free country can pursue an independent foreign policy. Self-determination means being economically and politically independent from the triple lock of imperialism. Anti-imperialism is our only guarantee of independence and the best means of ensuring our neutrality. Thank you.
Our final speaker is Clare Daly, who doesn't really need an introduction.
Thanks very much, Roger. Now, I appeared at an event in Dunleary last week with Roger, and my views were totally misrepresented, so no doubt I'll get into more trouble again this week, but I'm very glad for the invite, and thanks very much to everybody for turning out. The title of tonight's meeting was Peace and Neutrality, and actually I've had a lot of people contacting me over the past period saying, look, sure, of course I'm for peace, of course I'm for neutrality, but there's a war on now and it's different. But actually our contention here is that being for peace and neutrality is precisely more important when there is a war on. There's no point in being anti-war when there isn't a war. You've got to be anti-war when there is a war, but that even seems like a mad view in the current mad times that we live in. So I'm really grateful for the invite to come here today. I think all of us are really lucky to have the space to discuss these ideas out with mutual respect, to have rational argument, because so much of the debate in Ireland has been marshalled in hysteria, in emotive terms, which is understandable in many ways when people are exposed to the tragedy of war, the devastation being meted out to the innocent people in Ukraine, their country destroyed, their lives destroyed, exiled to Ireland and other countries and so on, and the war continues. So we understand how people look on that and are shocked and horrified and want it to end. But we don't help those people by hysteria and just banging the drums of war and jingoism and anti-Russian rhetoric and so on. So when we argue for a debate around these issues, it's not because we're Putin puppets or we have some secret sort of sympathy for Russia or we're on their payroll. It's with a genuine desire to, as ordinary people who inhabit planet Earth, work out how we can resolve these horrific problems facing humanity. So I think we're all privileged to be here and to have that space, which is too often denied in our Irish mainstream media, who only want to see this narrative in terms of goodies and baddies. And I made the point at the meeting I was at with Roger last week that the Pope had come out with a statement in the last 2 weeks which was absolutely, I wouldn't disagree with a word of it, and the Pope has been absolutely forthright in his condemnation of Russia for the war, but he also said that NATO played a part, that they facilitated the aggression, that the arms industry used war to test weapons, and that the war in Ukraine was the consequence of foreign interference, the way the wars in Yemen and Syria and so on were. And when I heard that, I went, oh my God, he is going to be called a Putin puppet, an embarrassment and a disgrace, the way we are. But that didn't happen. They just ignored him because they couldn't call the Pope a Putin puppet. Well, it may happen yet, but they couldn't yet. So they just ignored him. A powerful world leader comes out with a call for peace, and it isn't deemed meritorious enough for a comment in our media. That's what you're up against. So what you're talking about is the people who call for peace and neutrality are either demonised as puppets of the Russian administration, or mad, or as I experienced coming across the bridge, which was a bit weird, because my offices are here upstairs in the Communist Party, and I was working here for the afternoon. I went across the river for some food before the meeting, and I met a couple of people on the way, and we've been out of Ireland working in Brussels. So the first fella said, "Harry Clare, how's it going?" Okay, fair enough, that was grand. Next fella, I knew him, big hug. The next thing, a man, very respectable man, quietly comes up to me in his suit to shake hands and say, "I'd like to thank you and Mick Wallace for the stance you've taken." But as he's doing that, a big, huge yoke behind him is going, "You absolute traitor, you Putin whore, you have disgraced yourself, you know, long live Ukraine," shouting and roaring all across the bridge. And that's what we're dealing with in Ireland. There is no space for rational debate. You're either demonised if you deviate from the mandate, or you're ignored in the case of the Pope. So I'm delighted to the Connolly School for giving us this facility, and if the lads are rushing off for buses and trains, we'll have plenty of time to answer questions later on. So what I wanted to do was really just deal with two things, really. One was the fact that our neutrality is under attack, and what are the key arguments that attack it. And the second one is that for me, our neutrality is more important than ever because of the war in Ukraine and because of the way the media are dealing with that. Now, the first thing about our neutrality, and the lads have dealt with it, is that it's very clear now that those who never wanted to talk about neutrality want to have a conversation about it. And what they mean by have a conversation is get rid of it now, once and for all. Because these are the people who all along lied about their support for neutrality and actively undermined it at every turn. If you look up at the Dáil records, now it may have changed now, but before we went to Europe, if you Google search neutrality in the Irish Dáil records, the person who's mentioned neutrality most in the history of the state was me, and the second person was Mick Wallace, so I'm very proud of that, so I always mention that. But they didn't want to talk about that when we wanted to talk about it. Hundreds of Dáil questions about the undermining of our neutrality, the facilitation of our civilian airport in Shannon for the US military on a daily basis, our involvement in PESCO, which despite the rhetoric of Fianna Fáil is about spending more money. It's not about spending better, it is about spending more money. I had the horror 2 weeks ago. I've been in the European Parliament walking by a meeting going on, and I see this fella in a military uniform, and I know my Irish Army uniforms because, like Ed, my father was in the Irish Army. And I went, this is like an Irish Army fellow, what is this meeting going on? So I muscled around the back, and it was a big Euro-militarism talk with the Pentagon represented on it, and this Irish Lieutenant Colonel was sitting up being the face of the EU militarism in that regard. So there have been elements in Irish society who've never wanted us to be neutral, and now they see the horrible war in Ukraine as being their chance to finish it off. And it's a big blow to them, the opinion polls that they've seen in recent time, but they have never wanted that. There's a group of people in Ireland, very influential, they are Europhiles. They've been embarrassed by the fact that the Irish people have voted against Nice, against Lisbon, that they've elected people like me or Mick Wallace or Joe Higgins or Patricia McKenna and so on, and they're embarrassed by that. But actually, people across Europe were very happy about that. We in Ireland are the only people who have a direct say on these matters of European treaties, and people across Europe who, like us, are worried about peace and security are very happy that we can have a say against that. And we know that that agenda has been undermined for years. There was a paper produced in the last EU mandate by the Fine Gael MEPs talking about undermining neutrality. We know that they took out reference to an EU army in the European elections and so on. And now Fianna Fáil in the European Parliament have brought out a paper about Irish neutrality in a changing Europe. And I want to deal with maybe some of those points because they are the arguments which they'll use to undermine neutrality. And the first thing I'd say is that actually Europe isn't changing. Europe has been hell-bent on the road to militarism for a long time now. It's a situation that has been denied by the Irish establishment. Sadly, Putin's illegal war has given them the excuse and the enemy that they wanted to launch that. But the truth is, that's what the direction that they wanted to go anyway. And we have the biggest war on the continent of Europe since World War II. And it's a consequence not that we're not militaristic enough, but we've been much more militaristic over the past period. And that has been billions of euros from the European defence budget, from the European budget on defence. So for the first time now in the last 2 years, we've had the European Defence Fund. And people say, well, how did that come about? Because the European Union was supposed to be a peace project. It wasn't supposed to be a military alliance. And the reason how they came to that was they asked for a consultation on how does Europe defend itself. So they set up what they called a group of personalities, which is a bit weird, to be honest, calling it that. But in any case, the personalities, 9 out of the 16 personalities, were representatives from the defence industry. And you don't need to be a genius to work out that they came up with that the best thing that Europe could do to defend itself will be to spend a bit more money on defence and deployment of defence. And right enough, that's exactly what happened. That's up and running now to the tune of billions. And the recipients of that are the very same companies who advised the European Union on that in the first place. We have the European Peace Facility. My God, George Orwell, he must be like doing absolute somersaults in his grave over all this stuff, because the European Peace Facility replaced the African Peace Facility. And the African Peace Facility was absolutely outlawed, the expenditure of that money on armaments. But the European Peace Facility allows African countries use their money given to them by the EU to buy EU weapons to use in their own countries to ferment civil unrest. So they come to Europe, and the same companies profit from keeping them out in accessing Europe when they seek refuge. That's the name of the game. We have 43 billion spent on militarisation in the past period. He's given me 2 minutes and I'm only on my second page. But in any case, this is huge. So that's the direction they were going on anyway. The EU says, and what Fianna Fáil say is, we have an obligation to the European Union in terms of our responsibility and our obligations. We have to kind of waiver our neutrality on that. No, we do not. Our access to the EU was on the basis of us not giving up our neutrality. The government issued a white paper at the time. Every treaty since has been on safeguards for Irish neutrality. Article 42.7, which is a mutual defence clause in the European Union, is specifically that Irish neutrality shouldn't be compromised. Another favourite that they have is, oh, well, that was then, but the world is changing. Sure, aren't we involved in all these NATO projects anyway? And do we want to stand by while democracies are attacked? Seriously, we're a neutral country. We shouldn't have been involved in those things in the first place. And we've stood by while democracies were attacked all over the globe when the US were doing it. Not only did we stand by, but we actively participated in it. So they're trying to downplay all of this interference in regions around the world. They're trying to blur the triple lock. Fianna Fáil actually say that it's hampering our ability at peacekeeping. 64 years we've been involved in UN peacekeeping. Once China used their veto, it was a thing over Taiwan, long story, it was 20 years ago, and Fianna Fáil are trying to say the triple lock doesn't work, it will stop us from peacekeeping. That is not the case. They're trying to blur the lines between NATO and between peacekeeping. The EU is not a multilateral peace organisation. It's a geopolitical I suppose, intergovernmental organisation out for its own stakes, and we can't bridge that gap. I know they're telling me I can't believe that the time has gone so long. I wanted to deal with a few points on how positive Irish neutrality is, and I just want to take the liberty on that a little bit, because we are uniquely placed in Europe, and I feel that all the time. I mean, people might think like that we are, I know our reputation has been muddied here, we are pariahs in Ireland and all that, but actually in Europe on a daily basis we get contacted by people all over who say thank you for speaking out for peace. It's so important that that independent voice is there. So we do that not just for the people in Ireland, but for the ordinary people all across Europe who are the victims of these horrible wars, including the Ukrainians, including the Russians, including EU citizens. And there's nothing embarrassing about that. But I mean, to me, Ireland is uniquely placed. We are a mature democracy, at the centre of Europe, yet with the colonial past. So most of the power brokers in the EU were former colonial powers. They know nothing about conflict resolution. We were oppressed, yet we're a Western power and a democratic state. We're uniquely placed. Finland and Sweden giving up their neutrality, to be honest, they were non-aligned in name only. So actually, we can be the guarantor of a place for European nations, for neutral nations in Europe. And that is a powerful voice, because if Ukraine wanted to come in, they would have to be neutral. Moldova are proudly neutral. All of these countries have a place in a united Europe, which actually involves Russia as well. And the ordinary people of Europe benefit nothing from this militarism. So, look, I had millions more things to say, but Roger's telling me to shut up. So I think we have in our Irish neutrality a badge that gives us a door into every country. Our peacekeeping, all of that is, okay, it's been undermined recently, but we still have that and we could be using that. And I think we need to stake a claim for that, because it's not just about the interests of people in Ireland. We can be a powerful voice for all of those people across Europe and across the world who want peace, who want their money and their income to be used to dealing with issues like climate change or housing and health, not war and militarism, which doesn't benefit everybody. So, look, I'll shut up and we'll take loads of questions.
There's going to be a collection now to help pay for expenses and stuff, right?
Silent money, oh yeah.
Silent money. But if it's silent money, perhaps I can't see anybody, so just put your hands up if you want a question, providing you do the collection slightly quietly. Any questions? I'm going to try and take you 3 in a row.
I keep talking now, because I fired up my half my
there's one there.
speeches in the bin now.
I haven't got a question. Well, I've been meaning to do this for a long, long time. I just want to say to Clare Daly especially, no disrespect to anyone else, but many, many thanks on behalf of my way and our 4 kids. We're all for peace. And you're ready to get emotional because it's a very emotional subject. So keep on doing what you're doing, because there's thousands and thousands of people in this country who support you and me all the way. So go and meet them, Margaret.
It's more of a comment. First of all, this is not the first war in Europe. And I say that because I come from Greece. Cyprus, a member of the European Union, is occupied from 1974, occupied by a country to be a member of the European Union. And we also had Yugoslavia, 10 years of the war. I also come from a country that is not neutral, and we see the problems of non-neutrality. We are in a constant aggression, staged aggression with our neighboring countries, especially Turkey. We buy weapons from the French to use them against Turkey, supposedly. Turkey buys weapons from Germany to use them against us. EU and NATO always say, just find it between you, we don't care about you, and we are there to preserve our peace, supposedly. And all these weapons are used in Yemen, in Israel, in Syria in the past, and in Ukraine now. And soon enough, I see my country becoming a target of a war, of terrorist attacks, I don't know what. Instead of being a center with the long relations we have with both Ukraine and Russia, instead of being a center for negotiations for peace. And I want to say that I don't want this picture from the future to be a future for Ireland too, or for any other country. Because that's what happens when neutrality is denied. That's just the comment I wanted to make.
I have one more. Sorry, I couldn't see it. Get your hand up. Yourself, yeah.
Sorry, I just saw something recently by a guy called Bobby McDonough. I think he's a Department of Foreign Affairs person, and he was talking about how Ireland has periodically disgraced themselves internationally. And particularly, he was referring to during the Falklands War, when apparently Charlie Haughey opposed Thatcher's attacks. The EU, as a result, couldn't act. As far as I remember, this is what he's talking about. But I was actually living in Africa myself at the time, it's 40 years ago, and I was working as a volunteer in Lesotho. And the interesting thing about it is that I was involved with a lot of ANC refugees who were there from South Africa, and some of them have since become ministers of the government over there and so on. But their attitude was this: they were absolutely delighted that Ireland had taken this stance, and I was lauded as an Irish person as a result. Their understanding was that Haughey had taken a stand in support of, you know, the third world, so-called, and so on, you know. But it's just completely out of line with the view. I don't support Haughey, by the way, in any shape or form, and didn't then. But the point is like that the thinking coming out of the Department of Foreign Affairs is totally aligned with the imperialist view and the attempt to develop the EU as an imperial state with an army and so on and so forth. I was in the Labour Party for a long time before I was expelled, along with Clare and others. But one of the things I was on was the International Affairs Committee. And I remember all through the 90s, and when the Labour Party were in government, they succeeded in actually bringing in this thing called the Partnership for Peace. This was the attempt at the time to bring us closer to getting more neutrality into the EU arms. They're still at it. But this was seen as a totally innocent thing. We were going to be involved in what were called the Petersburg tasks, the Partnership for Peace and so on, and we just had to be in this, or else we were total traitors like to the poor and the people around the world who were in favour of the peace and so on. We all know where that went. We went nowhere. There were no peace tasks that we were involved in whatsoever of any work. So in fact, I would make is that I agree with all of the speakers. And in particular, I would make the point that Clare Daly is being attacked savagely at the moment, and he's entitled to defence in terms of people submitting letters to the papers, to RTE and so on. RTE is an absolute disgrace. But I'd argue that should be done to try to reverse what is actually happening.
They won't publish them.
No, probably not.
Well, the point is,
I know,
once they're there, it can be raised, the record.
Yeah, excuse me, sorry, I have to stop.
Thanks very much.
Not being disrespectful, but there could be other people who want to ask questions. Yeah, sorry, one there.
What I don't understand with Ireland at the moment, all of the media is really putting out this wrong impression. And what I don't understand is the amount of Irish people that are questioning it, but they're not getting any publicity. And I know one of my friends, even people that aren't that political, they're saying here, like Putin and all of people was provoked into this, and all of people were saying, American bases were going up all over Poland, and I spoke to a few Polish people who told me every time you go home there's another American base there in Poland. And like Putin was being surrounded, and not our people are saying that Putin was left with little choice. This is what they're saying. But what I would like to say is, it's not for me to say it, but I'm very proud of Clare. What I'd like to ask Clare is, why did you not say it the other 2 pages?
Yeah, no, look, and I get you, and you're totally right, and actually what you're feeling is being felt by people across Europe, and I'm sorry for getting emotional, but it's kind of like my incident on the bridge kind of freaked me out a bit. But in actual fact, while we're kind of constantly gobsmacked at the role of the media, we had the audacity today of finding out, and we've been dealing with this since yesterday, that a complaint has been made against myself and Mick for harassing journalists.
Not at the moment.
Because we have had the audacity to take one court case against RTE for one story against the hundreds of stories in the most vilest derogatory terms about us, both personally, politically, and every other way you could think. And we take one case and we're deemed to be harassing journalists, and I thought, oh my God, this is absolutely mental. But actually, in reverse, it's a total compliment as well. because we are the voices there that are standing out for reason, and it's resonating. I mean, I had a group of young fellas over from Finglas at the Parliament, and we bumped into people from Cyprus who were there visiting, and the Irish people were making the point, Jesus, you're getting it in the neck in the media, and suddenly the Cyprus delegation, this man comes running up, wants to hug and shake hands and thank us for the stance that we've made and how much of a fan he is. And you could see the Irish going, and I'm going, where's the Irish Times now? And I said, well, it wouldn't matter, because even if they were here, they wouldn't cover that anyway, because they don't want to know. I mean, the Irish Times supported Hitler, let's face it, so they're only coming in the tradition in which they came for. So I suppose my point is there's a lot of people who think the way we do, and I get people every day from Germany, from Italy, from Sweden, everywhere, and their voices are not being represented in Europe. And that's not unusual. The amount of turnout in the European elections, the disconnect from the citizens of Europe, from the European establishment is immense. We know that, but yet they talk as if they're the voice of all of us, but the people are disenfranchised. And I suppose the struggle we have is, how do we give voice to what a lot of people think but are afraid to say? So we've had MEPs coming up to us in the Eastern European countries in particular, where their history is intertwined with Russia. It's a painful, difficult history or whatever, but a lot of them are intermarried and friends. I've had Bulgarians coming up to me and saying, we really respect the way you voted, we were afraid, but our people are friendly with Russia, we don't want this. Polish people, all the rest. And we have to stop back and say, who is winning from this? And the people who are winning from it is the military-industrial complex, it's NATO, it's the US, and the European economy is being sacrificed. The living standards, apart from the deaths and the destruction of the people of Ukraine, which is heartbreaking, the Russians and so on, it's the living standards of the people of Europe that are going to pay for this madness as well. And I think it will change. Our media are shameful, but like they go on about, you know, shutting down Russian stations and that, and you know, I'm on the Foreign Interference Committee on the European Union, which is just an absolute laugh, but I mean, they go on about Russian and Chinese interference all the time. And the point we make is that actually, do we think that Russia and China engage in disinformation? Of course they do. Every country engages in propaganda and promotes its own. Actually, Russia and China are brutal at it. They're actually crap at it. And NATO and the US are far, far better. This is a total propaganda war of actresses and actors going through the war zones. Prime ministers, I'd say the hotels in Kiev can't keep up with the bookings of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael going over to visit and view the war. I mean, it's an obscenity. But that we can't break through that. So what we have to try and do is articulate this into what is in the hearts and minds of people, but it's not being expressed in the media. But it does exist, like it definitely does. The view that you're getting isn't what people think. It is what some people think, but it's not what most people think. And it's our interests who are being served. And that's why events like this are so important. And that's why our neutrality is so important, because people actually look to Ireland. We're really weird, like we're this weird little country on the periphery of Europe. We've lost the Brits, who, despite the fact that we hated them, they got us and we got them more than the others, because the mainland Europeans are all this politically correct sort of, you know, broken English and all that, and they're very nice and everything, but we're kind of different. And then you've the Eastern Europeans who have their own agenda. We can bridge a lot of that, like we really can. And
Fair.
How we do it, I don't know. Okay, Roger doesn't want me talking here, I'm going home.
Well, I mean, people have to get buses and trains here on either side of me. So, Ed, before he comes back, there were two American heroes fined €10,000 for what they did. And Ed is having a trial coming up in June, and he needs, I'm absolutely certain, some money as well, because I cannot see him being treated any differently. So he is setting up a WhatsApp, what you call it? GoFundMe group. Well, he should, because that's, yeah, it does work. Money is raised. Ed, over to you.
15th of June. Yeah, it's on the 15th of June. Very similar to Ken and Tarek's case. Two of us went into Shannon Airport over 5 years ago, in fact, and now it's coming to trial on the 15th of June. We're optimistic because we can't lose. If we get convicted, it'll get much more publicity, exposing more of what's happening at Shannon Airport. Just responding separately to the comment there that there are loads of US bases now in Poland, You might think that nothing like that is happening in Ireland. Well, recently in April, Australia announced that they were providing 6 155mm artillery guns to Ukraine. On the 4th of May, a large Ukrainian Antonov 124 aircraft took off from Amberley, Royal Australian Air Force Base near Brisbane, Australia. More than likely picked up these 6 artillery weapons, very large guns with ammunition. It flew from Australia to Japan, onto Alaska, stopped twice for refueling across Canada, and landed in Shannon Airport on Saturday, the 7th of May, and on Sunday the 8th took off from Shannon Airport. It landed in an airport called Brystow in eastern Poland. That's the main airport now being used to supply weapons to Ukraine. We are actively involved at the moment in shipping weapons to Shannon to Ukraine. But of course we're also on a daily basis have troops going to Shannon Airport, going now to Eastern Europe as well as to the Middle East. We are still daily actively supporting wars all over the Middle East and now Eastern Europe. And this is your Shannon Airport, now being used as a US base. Clearly it's time this stopped. We must, as Clare says, be promoting peace, not promoting war. And as I mentioned earlier on, peace activists are being dragged through the courts. Those responsible for Irish complicity in torture and in war crimes are getting off scot-free. But much to be done, and I look forward to your support in time.
No, just in relation to the whole thing of the media, I mean, I think everyone was taken by surprise by the complete control of the media coming from that NATO had once the war started. I mean, you'd begin to believe what they said. I mean, that Putin walked into a trap in the Ukraine. Because obviously, I mean, this plan didn't come into place overnight. But I mean, like I can remember back in the days when you had Solidarnosc in Poland, and when the Soviet Union went into Afghanistan, and you had the opposition group. I've never seen anything like this complete sort of block out of any alternative viewpoint. I mean, you can barely have time to even think about it. I mean, it's everywhere. I mean, I stopped watching RT News. I decided to do it on Ash Wednesday. I said I'd give it up for the good of my soul because I'd kicked the shit out of television, you know. But I mean, I don't feel I've lost out anything but it, you know. But I mean, like, but it's unbelievable, and it's, I mean, I mean, it's not just on the news. It's sport, cultural events, everything. I mean, the anti-Russian feeling is unbelievable. And I mean, whatever about a belligerent country involved in it, I'm not saying that would justify them in the jingoism. But I mean, we are a neutral country, and we have a seat on the Security Council of the United Nations, and we should be using that to bring the two sides together for to talk about peace instead of lining up behind NATO and that, you know. I mean, it's incredible, you know. But I mean, in fairness, I mean, in one way you almost have to take your hats off to the Americans. I mean, it's awesome the amount of control they have over it, you know.
Yeah, just hang on. I just want to make a few remarks myself, if you don't mind. I was looking up the circulation of the Irish Examiner. Maybe 15 years ago it had a circulation of 50,000. It's now 22,000, and they've taken themselves off the ABC market. That might not be unique. The circulation of newspapers, because people are getting their information from phones, and circulation of all the corporate media is going down. That could be one of the reasons why they can have article after article after article in their papers about how neutrality should be destroyed, and they don't have quite the same influence that they used to have. And that's a good thing. And just factually, just for people's information, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute does research on the amount of money spent per annum. In 2020, Russia had spent 9% of the total amount of money spent on the military. NATO spent 56%, and USA on its own was 39%. So and that's before the massive increase. So if you're going to know what's going to happen in this war, then, you know, Russia is going to have a hell of a job trying to defeat 56% of equipment pouring in as against their 9%. So they won't give in because they see it as another attack on them, as happened in the Second World War. And we all know that 24 million people died, right? Finland, who is now no longer being neutral, spent 3 years fighting shoulder to shoulder with the Nazis and Hitler. So these are realities that, whatever about us, the Russians aren't going to forget. They helped to besiege Leningrad, where 1 million men, women and children were killed. So these are just basically factual information. Now, any more questions? I can't.
Wasn't
yeah, go on, say. You have to get my permission first. You can't just go on.
Wasn't Tony Benn, we called Tony Benn, Clare? Tony Benn was vilified during the wars against Iraq. When Tony Benn went on BBC, what are you showing? What are you about? Do we give a damn that a Palestinian woman journalist was murdered in the West Bank by the Israelis? And we allow these mouthpieces of Fine Gael and Labour to come on, make excuses. Who benefits the war? Is it not time, as the Israeli journalist says, Gideon Levy from the Haaretz newspaper, is it not time to actually say, when the war in Palestine, enough is enough? Where is the concerns of the political arm, of the political mouthpieces on the issue of Palestine? Where is the concerns of the European Union? When they label us as anti-Semites, we should say, in whose name? And demand an end to that war.
I'll take 2 more quick questions. Sorry, yeah.
Just a quick one to come back to what you said, Clare, about how we use our neutrality to get on the Security Council. Just in February, Ireland published its first strategy paper for Latin America, the first such strategy paper in Foreign Affairs issued for any other region. We are using our history as being supportive of independence movements in Latin America as finding our place among the Europeans and the North Americans. So when I was speaking to a guy who is a civil servant, who works in civil servant yesterday, and he says, when you come to this meeting today, remind the people of Canada and the rest that there's a military element of neutrality. But when you're talking to civil servants in the political class, remind them of the diplomatic and the economic value of our neutrality as well, because that's the language they speak, and refer to them getting onto the Security Council and refer to the Latin American strategy paper as examples where they themselves are relying on our neutrality to do business in the wider world. So it's just something to have in the back pocket.
Okay, one more. Back there.
Yeah, just on the question of the media again. And it's very interesting that point was brought up earlier about the Falklands and Charlie Haughey, and this guy Stephen McDonough in the Irish Times. And he says that Charlie Haughey was disgraced because of his position on the Falklands War. But actually what happened was that Charlie Haughey was put under pressure by the British and Thatcher to support the British view on the Falklands. And it was said that it was important because of the Northern Ireland thing. And so what Haughey did was he said, I'm supporting it as a diplomatic initiative and I'm getting the EU back. So he supported Thatcher to a certain extent because it was important to have a good relationship for the peace process. And when the sinking of the Belgrano happened, that was not what Haughey had signed up to. So he withdrew his support and condemned Britain for that sinking of the Belgrano. So I would say that it's Bobby McDonough who is a disgrace. And Haughey actually has some connection with the Irish tradition. And that these people in the media, we will have to take them on. That's what's going to happen in this neutrality debate. They don't know what they're talking about a lot of the time. Just finally, I'd like to say full support for the 4 speakers tonight.
Do you want to say anything?
No, I mean, I think that hits the nail on the head. Like, a lot of the media are completely disconnected from where things are at, and I think it was that practical sort of compromising approach which none of us probably, support overall, but actually that Irishness of saying, do you know what, diplomacy is about compromise. It's about sitting down with people you don't like. It's about striking a deal. That's how we live together as equals, or we live and let live and all of that. And I think Irish people are pretty good at that. And we can't be silenced by the media that this is something embarrassing, that we are the shame of Europe by having that view, because actually a lot of people in Europe are really good in that regard. And I mean, I think, look, it's there's a total hypocrisy around the war, and De Valera was very good at sort of managing this as well, about what can a small nation do when the big powers make the shots. We can just call them out and keep our heads, and I think that's all we can do. These are dangerous times. I mean, the anti-Russian sentiment across Europe is truly frightening. The reports we get in from other European countries, even worse than Ireland, in terms of graveyards being desecrated to the Russian soldiers who fought the Nazis, history being rewritten about what Nazism is, children in Latvia being denied the right to be educated in Russian, which is their language, and so on, houses being targeted. This is really scary stuff. Like, this is the demonisation of Russian people, and there's many Russian people who live in Ireland who are living in fear, and it's a disgrace, and the media is enabling that. So I think we have to just keep calling it out and having these conversations, but confident that actually a lot of people can see through this. And I do think your point is right. A lot of people are disconnecting from the media. They're not watching it, they're not listening to it, they're making their own opinions. They know their voices aren't being heard, and that's the problem. So there's this huge gulf between official opinion and the hearts and minds of ordinary people. And normally, like in the Iraq War, we were all on the streets so we could express it and we could feel the solidarity with each other because we were all on the one page. This is more complicated. Now we can't feel it. We're in our houses. We're feeling there's something not right, but we're not feeling that solidarity, and that's a real difficulty. And it's not just a difficulty in Ireland, it's across the whole of Europe and the whole of the world. But we should remind ourselves that actually most of the world, 30 out of the 195 countries in the world, are sanctioning Russia. The other 165 don't think Russia are great, and they want them to go in and brutalise Ukraine. Of course they don't, but they've been the victims of US militarism and other interference, and that they kind of go, hold on now, there's not a scale here, like there's a lot of hypocrisy, there's a lot of war is bad no matter where it is, like, so can we have a bit of balance here and deal with this situation? So we need to reach out. Actually, the majority of the world's population lives in countries outside the areas that are putting in the sanctions, but because we're in the Atlanticist bubble, their view doesn't count. But actually what we should be doing as a neutral country embedded in the West, we can be the bridge to the majority populations of the world who are also conquered by colonialism like us, but we're in the camp now. We could be brilliantly playing that role, and we used to as peacekeepers and that's what we need to be fighting back. And I actually think that is embedded, as Roger said, in the psychology of Irish people. Really, it's part of what we are. Like, we talk to everybody and put up with everyone, But, yeah.
Anybody else?
Over there.
Over there.
Over here.
Just a couple of points about the media. It's perfectly clear that virtually all, for example, the Irish Times reports come on international affairs come from four sources: the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Financial Times, and the Guardian. And it's obviously the newspapers are selling fewer and fewer papers. They've sacked most of their journalists over the years, and they're getting all this stuff free, and they just reprint it. And what's also clear for anybody looking at American politics is that neoliberalism has completely taken over those particular newspapers, and the English Guardian absolutely taken them over. And what it means when neoliberalism has taken them over, it means the CIA has taken them over. And the CIA is providing all the copy that goes around the world. And you know, this is one of the reasons why we're only getting one point of view. The other thing, and I've been around for longer than I should have been maybe, but the fact is, I remember in the 60s and 70s when we were involved in various activism, whether it was housing or the North or whatever, it was always understood that every newspaper and every television or radio channel had a British spy. And at least one, but things were much simpler in those days. They just needed one, a paid spy. It was well understood, and that there was a constant attempt to affect the media. Now, this isn't something I've heard for a long time. In fact, last weekend at the summer school, at the Roger Casement Summer School, somebody was pointing out that Maura Comfort had submitted her memoir to a publisher for publication, and it was passed on to the professor of history in UCD, and he came back with a whole rake of comments that this shouldn't be published, this is ridiculous, it's full of contradictions, it's historically wrong, and so forth. So during her life, it was never published. And it turned out subsequently that this man, Desmond Williams, was an MI5 agent. And well established. So the point is, we do have all that stuff going on, and the only thing I find strange is nobody has talked about this for years. But definitely money is changing hands to quite a large number of people. There's absolutely no question. That's the way it works.
Okay. You want to say it, Jerry?
No, I just couldn't.
Can I say one thing about BIDA? PANA is a relatively small organisation, and we send out press statements occasionally, including to RTE. And what RTE have done, if you get a press statement at the bottom, it's called unsubscribe. You can unsubscribe to it. What RTE and all the political programmes on RTE have all automatically unsubscribed, so they don't even get our press statements. And that's something all of you can take up, because unlike the Irish Times or the Sunday Times, or the RTE is allegedly, I know it's an allegation, but it's supposed to be owned by all of us. Mm-hmm. And you can write into them and contact them and complain about that. Or if you see something on the radio that's wrong, you can complain about that. You can act, and if you have a strong enough case, you can take legal action. Of course, the problem with RTE is everybody's watching Netflix as well. You know what I mean? It's not just the papers, but the media has got so diverse. The corporate media in this country, just including RTE, don't have the power they used to have. So I wouldn't get too worried about them. But that's the problem for them. It's not a problem for us. It's a problem for them. Sorry.
Can I just ask Claire something, if you don't mind? Sorry, Claire. In your dealings in the European Parliament, do you see a lot of US military personnel within your work surroundings? And secondly, I think a lot of people must understand that this war is not between Russia and Ukraine. It's a proxy war between the United States and Russia. Because Russia this year alone, the figures that one of the review reported on this month's copy, which is well worth reading, and whom editor speaking here on Saturday, which will come along to, says it's $1.3 trillion spent on US military alone this year. And this particular war suits the United States because there will be no US bodies going back home on their base. All they're doing is supplying technical assistance and massive armaments. So where you say within Ireland here in 26 and 6 that we have an institutionalized feeling about neutrality, within the United States, they are the exact opposite, where militarism is institutionalized among most people in general thought. And with every $1 billion spent, and this is proved correctly, every $1 billion spent on US military, 1.5 billion is earned to the economy. And the Americans learned that during the Second World War. So war is something that produces a benefit to the US citizens, obviously except for 40 million euros. So something people should really understand. You know, it's an economic thing as well, war. It's just not, you know, the simple people think.
It totally is, because even though ordinary people lose, the military-industrial complex wins, and it has captured the European Union over the past period. The European Union was supposed to be a peace project coming out of World War II and all the rest. It was never supposed to be a military alliance or anything like that. There are 12,000 lobbying organisations in Brussels, so that's probably about 100,000 people working to influence EU policy. And they have managed, many of them in the military-industrial complex, they have managed to capture EU politics now and get direct financing for military expenditure, direct financing for border control for much the same industry, European peace facility, military mobility, all of the different headlines. There are billions going in, and that was even before the war. And now since the war, as you say, there's about 47 billion coming in now into military hardware that is being tested. In fairness to the Pope, he says, like, arms are tested in wars, they're testing this stuff in Ukraine. It's absolutely lethal. US personnel, particularly NATO, maybe not directly US, but NATO personnel and expertise is in the European Parliament every single week. I don't think I've been at a security and defence meeting or foreign interference in the democratic processes of the European Union committee meetings when NATO haven't been present or their mouthpieces. Unbelievable. The expertise are generally NATO or US funded think tanks, because it's not just NATO, they're in the form of supposed NGOs who are again funded by the US. And this is why once the war started, on message everywhere, the propaganda came out. And as I say, it's not that I don't think the Chinese and Russians do propaganda. They do, they're just not as good at it. So they are absolutely everywhere, no question or doubt about it. It's really scary. And the proof of the pudding is, as you say, 1.3 trillion. The EU spending more than it ever did. What more proof do you need? Do you know what I mean? Like they say, oh, we need more militarism. No, you don't. When you didn't have that militarism, we didn't have, I mean, you're right, this isn't the first war in Europe or anything like that, but it is the worst, and it's heading to be the longest now since World War II, the way it's going. I think it's going to be definitely the most prolonged, the most casualties, the most destruction, and there's people winning out of this. Like, so, but you're right, there's no US bodies, it's very clean, they make the money. This project was about breaking the link with Nord Stream 2. It's about trying to annihilate the Russian economy. And I know a lot of people go, well, so what, serves them right, they're the ones who started this war. And that might make you sound and feel good, but think about what that means. That's driving Russia into a place where they can only escalate. And that's, like with nuclear power and all the rest, incredibly dangerous. You've got to sit down and sort it out. And that's what the US are at, like, and it's frightening. It's beyond the scale I've ever seen, for sure.
Claire, could I ask you about is there any fellow feeling amongst the German MEPs for the position you have taken, or is it entirely?
That's a very good point. Our own feeling, and we've expressed it, is, and maybe people think we're naive, my own belief is that this war would never have happened if Merkel was still there. That in actual fact, France and Germany in their own ways, and I wouldn't agree with Macron or Merkel politically or whatever, I think they were, in the run-up to the war, they were keeping the door of dialogue open. There was a division amongst the European Union powers. Now the Eastern Europeans are absolute anti-Russian war hawks in the main, with their governments, not their people, but their governments are very much like that. Germany and France in particular were trying to keep the door open. I think we see a lot of concern in Germany. Like if you look at I suppose the most feedback we get, the top countries who tell us we're great are Germany and Italy, and actually Sweden, bizarrely. They'd be the top three of people getting involved, and there is that deep-rooted anti-militarist history in Germany. They know what this is about. Their economy is going to be scuppered. And we've had Irish MEPs say, turn off the gas now. It's been established that you're talking about probably straight away 1 million job losses in Germany and a rippling effect. So people across Europe are going to be pauperised. Not a single life in Ukraine saved by it. What's that about? The only people that's benefiting is the Americans who are getting their LNG into Europe. It's what Trump tried to do and couldn't do. And now we're getting rotten, filthy, fracked US gas into thing. And I mean, for years we've been arguing to end the reliance on fossil fuels and Russian natural gas. It's been the others who've been keeping our dependency there. We want recyclables and renewables, but this is going backwards, and a lot of the environmental standards have been ditched. So I think there is concern across the political groups. It wouldn't be uniform. Funnily enough, the German Greens are really gung-ho militarists, whereas actually the more conservative Merkelite ones are a bit, maybe we shouldn't be going there. So it's not a strict left-right divide. I think German interests see Germany's. Macron, pains me to say it, has been the only one arguing for some sort of normality in this situation, and maybe with the elections over because of French economic interest. But I said to the German MEPs, for God's sake, is there not even capitalists there in Germany who have the gumption to speak out and say their profits are going to be annihilated? I don't understand this. And they say, yes, there is. There's loads of them. But they're afraid, because when they spoke out and said, well, you know, we have workers here and we have jobs here and we've got to look after ourselves, they were surrounded and they were silenced, and even their works councils and someone said, well, we don't mind losing our jobs, we've got to all stand with Ukraine. But this is how, it's lunacy, like, people are going to die, like, and starve in Europe. So it's going to take time, but this is very serious. So I suppose your answer is, I do think there's people in Germany and in France in particular who can see through this. The European Parliament is a bit mad anyway, and it's a bit unrepresentative. But we do have people across the groups who would agree, but everyone's afraid. It's terrifying, like what they're doing to people and how they're demonising people, and so they kind of tend to stay quiet.
You talked about Macron and Merkel in terms of them keeping the door open, and you painted the Eastern Europeans as kind of mad for war and gunning for it. They didn't make it off the ground. They've been getting pissed off by the Russians for the past 200 years. You know what I mean? So,
and the Germans?
I mean, European history didn't start. There's a reason why countries are joining NATO. There's a reason why countries in Eastern Europe feel that they are getting hounded by the Russians. I mean, countries democratically, countries joining NATO democratically, you can't go against that, or else you've no interest in democracy.
I think that's a very good point, and I mean, I think Ukraine was a very good example of that, because when the Ukrainian government at the time decided to insert the idea of joining NATO in their constitution, it was against the specific wishes of the people of Ukraine, who in opinion poll after opinion poll in 2014, 2016 and 2018 were very much against joining NATO. So I think you're right that there has been, if you like, an activation of a divide, where in actual fact Zelensky was elected on a platform of making peace with Russia. That wasn't being against the EU, but live and let live. And that's what the people who live in Eastern Europe have to do. And when the people in Poland used to say that to me before the war, like when we came to the Parliament in the early days, and I was a shop steward in the airport, I have loads of Eastern European friends, and no more than Irish people have different opinions from their government. Obviously people in Poland and these countries have different opinions from their governments and stuff, so that goes without saying. But a lot of the Eastern Europeans used to say to me when I talk about neutrality, and they go mad because they don't really get neutrality because of their history, you're right, and they'd say to me, that's all right for you, you weren't occupied by Russia. And I'd say, you're right, but we were occupied by the United Kingdom. And I don't see anybody in Ireland arguing to rearm the IRA in anticipation. Yeah. The answer that we've had is that, look, we know what they did to us, we don't like it, but we have to suck it up and live with them because they're our nearest neighbour and they're kind of joined there. And that's the message that they have to do as well. So I get it, I do understand the history of that, but the only way to overcome that is through dialogue. We can't wipe off the existence of Russia of 130 million people, or blaming their people for what their government has done, no more than I blame the Polish people for what the Polish government, or the Irish people for what the Irish government has done. And unfortunately, I suppose, because, you know, Zelensky was elected with that programme of making peace, and they tried, but outside forces caused that division. And it's not about people have to love Russians or love anybody. We all have to learn to live with each other and kind of suck it up in that way. And unfortunately now things have gone a bit too far. So that'll be kind of my read on it. But no, you're right, I do get where they come from. And this is what I say to them. And I think then there will be different views there as well. Like the Bulgarians will be more pro-Russian, the Latvians, Lithuanians will be different and all of that. But it's a fair point, but that would be my response to it.
Right, we're coming to an end now, but there are two people over here which I didn't see. Would you?
I just have a question now. Back on the motion that was put forward in the European Parliament in condemnation of Russia, obviously you know yourself the motion was filled with a load of rubbish that no person in their right mind should vote for. Do you have any indication or particular reason? Just wondering if you know why Chris McManus and Ming Flanagan, two MEPs who, you know, their positions typically would have been on a more anti-militarist side, decided to, you know, go in and vote with the warmongers in the Parliament for that motion. Just if you have any.
I mean, look, I'm not going to like pass comment bad or good about anyone else, but I mean, the motion was, and people know, it was a motion to condemn the war, respect the integrity of Ukraine, and we voted for all those bits, but then it had 46 other bits about pumping arms in, about LNG, awful stuff. And a number of the Irish MEPs, the Greens as well, would have voted for the amendments which, or against the amendments which had bad stuff in it, but then in the end they voted for the motion which had all the bad stuff in it. They would say that was a tactical decision that they decided to make. I feel myself that they made it under political pressure. In their quiet moments you'd have to ask them what their views were. I don't condemn them for it, but I do very much object to the way in which that was spun in the Irish media, that we refused to condemn the aggression, which we absolutely didn't, and they didn't either. And in actual fact, some of them, we won't name, some of that broadly came up to us privately and said, we totally get what you did, it was, you know, we probably would have gone with you, but we were told by our parties not to. So that's the way.
Person behind you.
Hi, thanks very much, it's been really interesting. I don't think I agree with much of what you said, but I found it very enlightening, and thank you very much. I think something that I struggle with is I find myself agreeing with lots of the rhetoric about American imperialism, and it's difficult to disagree with any of that. But I think there's clear examples of Russian imperialism, and I think this war is quite evidently an example of that. We can argue about whose fault it is, but ultimately it's a war of aggression, Russian aggression. So what I come back to, what I, in my own reflection, come back to is what can be done. And I agree with you, clearly dialogue is important, but it's also very difficult for Ukrainians, I would imagine, to dialogue when their cities are being bombed, when their sovereignty is being attacked. Do we just stand by? Is that the solution when an imperial power attacks a sovereign nation? I struggle to accept that.
I think that's really good, and I really appreciate you articulating that, and I think that's why it's so important, and I genuinely mean that we have a space where as adults we can exchange a different point of view without caricaturing or slandering each other. It's so important because the issues at stake are the future of humanity. So you're totally right. Russia has been aggressive. Russia bears the primary responsibility as far as I'm concerned. They're the ones who crossed the line. They're the ones who invaded a sovereign territory. I made the qualifier that there were other things. Doesn't excuse it, but it explains it. So you're right. But let's look at that. So if their aim was that they wanted to overtake Ukraine, as some people say it was, they've lost that. Not going to happen. No one's going to stand for that. The Western society have proven that they're not going to let that happen. The Ukrainian people have proven that they're not going to let that happen. So if Russia was deluded enough to think that, they've lost that battle. That, I suppose, is the first thing. we still do have, though, a very significant population in the Donbass, where there has been a war raging since 2014, 14,000 dead, a lot of that at the hands of the Ukrainian authorities and so on. We have Crimea, which Russia annexed illegally, but with the support of the majority of people, so it's complex. Are we going to have a war to take that back against the wishes of the people who live there? So we're talking about how can we sort this out, kind of knowing that Russia were wrong, but if we're going to penalise them, and the price of penalising them is going to be the deaths and destruction of Ukraine, I don't think that's worth it. So for me, it's a kind of case of saying, end it, stop it now. Now you could say, well, that's where we were before the invasion. And that's true, that is where we were, was at somewhere around Minsk 2. And if they had implemented it, we wouldn't have had that. But we have it, and we either deal with that reality or we don't. So for me, it's a case of saying the first thing has to be stop the war. Yes, Russia is responsible, but if we're going to punish them and the price of punishing them is going to be killing loads of Ukrainians and keeping them, I don't think that's worth it. And actually, the Ukrainians themselves, and if you listen to what Zelensky has said, and there was even a very good article in the Washington Times recently about this, they wanted to sit down, they were sitting down, and Johnson arrived on the scene and basically deterred them from sitting down with the Russians. And all along, like, the mandate of Zelensky was to deal with the Russians. So nasty and all, and I don't want to see Putin rewarded. I'd love to see the people of Russia overthrow Putin. But at the same time, you know, we've got to deal with the reality that's there. So I suppose I don't see it as standing by. I mean, for me, if Europe had said, enough, we want to see Minsk 2 implemented. And they didn't do that because they all signed up to it. Ukraine broke it, Russia broke it, everybody broke it. And like, it suited America to have it broken as well. But if the international community really got behind them and said, right, we have your back, and I'm really disappointed with China, and I've said this, people say, oh, you're on the Chinese media, and I go, yeah, and when I'm on it, I'm going, China, what are you doing in this? You're supposed to be the great diplomats, you kind of, Russia, listen to you, what are you doing to sort it out, like, you know, because it should be that. So I don't see Europe standing by. Like, to me, saying end hostility, sit down and talk, to me isn't standing by. I wouldn't tolerate a situation where Russia would be given the whole of Ukraine. They're not going to get the whole of Ukraine. That will never happen. But there may need to be some arrangement around Donetsk and Luhansk. Crimea, they have already. Box it off, finish it, sit down, talk, move on. That's what we should have been doing. You can say it's unfair, they shouldn't be rewarded. I don't think that's a reward. They're already after getting a kick. Their economy is going to take a hit from it. Nobody's a winner, but at least it stops hostilities, and that's really all we're kind of talking about. And I don't in any way, you're right, like, I mean, in the overall scale of things, there's a huge hypocrisy in the media about being really upset about this war and these refugees, which I'm kind of glad about, because I'm against all war and I'm for all refugees, and I've wanted all refugees to be welcome. So I'm actually glad that other people have come onto that page, and I hope that it represents that they'll see that through, because I'm glad we're welcoming Ukrainians, and I hope that we don't have other wars and all of that stuff, you know. But for me, and people do say that, oh, so you want us to stand by? No, I don't. But like, I quoted this Ukrainian peace activist, and he said, if you want war, you know, if you prepare for war, you get war. If you want peace, you have to prepare for peace. And diplomacy and dialogue is not nothing. It's a huge amount of work. I mean, ultimately, people sat down with Hitler, the US sat down with the Taliban. We've got to sit down with people we don't like and call it quits and live and deal with it. It's not nice, but we deal. And then absolutely punish the war crimes, whoever perpetrates them in the international courts, hold those to account. But we need neutral bodies, and there's a huge amount of hypocrisy. But I mean, look, maybe we don't agree, but isn't it great that we have the facility of debating these ideas? And for me, and Roger's going to kill me, but one of the ironic things about the present debate is that we talk about authoritarian regimes and the lack of democracy in Russia and China, and that's absolutely true. But a lot of the dialogue in the West is about shutting down dissenting voices. Yes, I live in a democratic state, I'm delighted with that, and I will express my dissenting voice, and I don't think there's anything wrong with having a different view about how to end the war. That should be a good thing in a mutually respectful society, and I suppose that's why I'm very glad that you raised the points and that we're all here tonight where we can discuss it like that. So.
Thank you all very much for coming along. I hope you enjoyed the debate. Don't forget, it's one thing to come here, but there are other, I'm not talking just about the Peace and Neutrality Alliance, there's the Galway Alliance Against the War. There are other organisations that are arguing in favour of a ceasefire and a peaceful solution to this problem, because if we don't solve it, I am of the opinion that it'll escalate and we'll all die. And I'm not the only person who thinks that. So, thank you for coming. Think about joining one of those peace groups. Think of getting involved, not just sit here and listen. Thank you.